In this episode, I've come down into northeastern France to the area near to Reims and the battlefields of the Aisne, where the British fought in 1914 and again in 1918, and where for most of the war the French were engaged fighting with the Germans, including the big French offensive here, the Nivelle offensive, the attack on the Chemin Dames in April of 1917. And in this episode, we'll visit some of the sites connected with those battlefields of the Great War. When Britain went to war in 1914, it had a plan to take an expeditionary force, the British Expeditionary Force, or the BEF, across to France to fight whatever battles lay ahead. And those battles were at Mons, where the opening shots were fired, and it took them on the great retreat from Mons down to the River Marne near Paris, when the Allies at the Battle of the Marne stopped that tip of the spear of the Schlieffenpan, the German advance, from getting into Paris and pushed them back over the River Marne, over the River Aisne, and they dug in here on the heights of the Aisne above the river. And this is where the first trenches were dug in that late summer, early autumn of 1914. So this is a British battlefield that most people are not familiar with. Men of the regular army came here at the beginning of the war, and British troops didn't return again until the end of the war in 1918, when tired units that had fought the Germans in the spring offensives were brought down here for a rest. And then on the 27th of May 1918, the next phase of the German advance broke against the British lines here, and those lines collapsed. So this cemetery here at Vendresse contains the graves of men killed in those battles of September and October of 1914, and some of the dead from May 1918 as well. And around me here in this battlefield of the Aisne, there are many small cemeteries, many small burial grounds where the dead of the BEF, the regular soldiers, the Old Contemptibles as they became known, are buried. It's a very interesting, special battlefield. A battlefield, though, much more associated with the role of the French army here on the Chemin Dames offensive of 1917. The British army returned to the Aisne in 1918, and I've come to Soissons to visit one of the lesser known memorials to the missing that commemorates the dead from the 1918 period who fell in the battles on the Chemin Dames and also in the Second Battle of the Marne, when the British, alongside the French in much greater numbers, pushed the Germans back in one of the most important offensives in this region of the Great War. And we're heading down through rebuilt Soissons, many of these buildings damaged both in the First and the Second World War, down towards where the Soissons Memorial is located. As you walk down through towns like Soissons, you realise that the modern world kind of lives side by side with the old world, with the history of the Great War. It's late lunchtime here in Soissons. People are returning to work. They're going about their daily lives. They're living their lives, really. It's what the sacrifice of men who fought here in the Great War was all about, to restore the nation of France here to what it had once been, and the people of France could be free to live their lives to the full. But when you come to this region of France, you're never really that far away from the Great War. And as we come down this street with the noise of the modern world around us, we turn into a corner, a junction here, and we come up to the Soissons Memorial, one of the smallest and lesser known memorials to the missing on the battlefields of the Great War. The Soissons Memorial commemorates nearly 4,000 British soldiers who fell on the Aisne battlefields in May, June and July of 1918. The most common date on the memorial is the 27th of May, when the Germans attacked across the Chemin Dames on that way and tired British units, some of whom had fought the Germans on the Somme in March and Flanders in April, came under concerted German attack and were pushed back. A high proportion of the dead from that battle do not have a known grave and are commemorated here. But it also commemorates not just defeat, but victory too, when British units pushed the Germans back alongside their French allies in that second Battle of the Marne in the summer of 1918. So the Soissons Memorial was one of the lesser visited of the Commonwealth War Graves Commission's memorials to the missing from the Great War, but an important one that marks an important milestone in the history of the British Army on the Western Front, from a period of defeat through to victory. And at the centre of it are Eric Kennington's striking depiction in stone of British soldiers of the Great War in this kind of 1920s Art Deco style. An incredible Great War memorial. The Soissons Memorial commemorates nearly 4,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers who died on the Aisne in May to the summer of 1918, who have no known grave. And amongst the panels of the different regiments that are commemorated, and it's quite diverse from county regiments through to Scottish regiments like the Black Watch, and all the supporting arms like the artillery and the Army Service Corps. Amongst those names, the vast majority of the British soldiers that are commemorated here are conscripts. This was reflective of the army of that stage of the war when men were conscripted at 18, sent overseas at 19, and by this stage, by 1918, men up to the age of 55 were being conscripted. So the memorial reflects the changing nature, really, of the British Army on the Western Front during the Great War. But amongst them as well, not just conscripts, there are one or two seasoned campaigners as well. Amongst the seasoned veterans that are commemorated on this memorial is Lieutenant Colonel R.E.D. Kent of the Greenhounds of the Yorkshire Regiment. He'd served in a Kitchener's Army battalion of that regiment on the Somme in 1916, and he'd been involved in the attack on the village of Fricourt. His company were opposite a very heavily defended German trench, and his battalion commander had ordered him not to attack at that point, but to wait for others to attack either side of him and then go forward. Just after 0 hour on the 1st of July 1916, his commanding officer was horrified to see Major Kent blow his whistle and lead his men out into no man's land, a decision that cost the vast majority of them their lives. The casualties were appalling. They're buried in a very small battlefield cemetery at that spot today. Kent was wounded but survived, and you might have thought that he'd be court-martialed for something like that, but typical of the army, they kind of moved him sideways, and he, in his defence, said that the purpose of officers was often to almost predict what orders might be, and that he was justified in this decision, that he was anticipating a situation that might arise. Whatever that decision, as we've said, was a costly one for the men under his command. Moved to another regiment, the East Yorkshire Regiment. He was killed here on the Aisne in the Battle of the Chemin Dames on the 27th of May 1918, leading his battalion in action. And with him really died the only way to ever truly find out why, against all orders and against all sense really, he led his men on the Somme into a pointless and futile attack. Memorials like this, as much as tell us about the past, the names that are commemorated amongst the missing sometimes also hide the secrets of the past too.